Hello, I'm Ted Asregadoo, and this is Truthout Interviews. On the program is Henry A. Giroux. He currently holds the Global TV Network Chair Professorship at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. That's in the English and Cultural Studies Department. And he's the author of many books on education, and he's also a member of Truthout's Board of Directors. Hello, Henry. Welcome to Truthout Interviews.
Hi, Ted. How are you?
I'm doing well. You recently penned an article on Truthout. And it's titled, When Schools Become Dead Zones of the Imagination, a Critical Pedagogy Manifesto. Now, in this article, you highlight a kind of battle between two forces, the forces of neoliberalism on the one hand, and the other of critical pedagogy. Now, for those who don't know, what exactly is neoliberalism?
Neoliberalism is basically an ideology, a mode of governance, and a form of policy that does basically three things. I mean, at one level, it operates off the assumption that the market is the only template by which all social problems can be judged and addressed. Secondly, it tends to create subjects that are basically consumers, that are market-based. Thirdly, as a mode of governance, it institutes policies that essentially undermine public schools by attempting to privatize them. It attacks labor unions. It attacks social provisions and attacks all aspects of the social state. In short, it tends to believe that profit-making is the essence of democracy and that any social bond that can't be understood within an exchange value matrix is considered worthless.
This neoliberalism, if you will, this was kind of a third way between, if you want, on the one hand, countries that were trending towards socialism and communism, and the others that were just complete, I don't know if this actually ever existed, neither did communism, but complete free market economies. But this is sort of a third way to try to bridge the gap. But now it has kind of gone more into this economic libertarianism in terms of everything should be about market-based choices, correct?
I don't think it ever was an attempt to be a third way. I mean, I actually think it's a counter-revolution of sorts. I mean, these are counter-revolutionaries. I mean, they want to go back to the 19th century. They want to reinforce and reproduce the Gilded Age. And they want to do that by basically eliminating all vestiges of the New Deal, the Great Society, and the social contract.
I think you're right. I mean, there is a sense of trying to be a counter-revolutionary, but with new tools. And those new tools often are within this obsession that you highlight with metrics, this constant measurement of people in terms of performance and even moods. And using technology, you highlight Bill and Melinda Gates, for example, and that their foundation gave about $500,000 to study the moods of students and how they react when they're being taught, and they're wearing some sort of skin sensors that will inform the researcher about how students are feeling as they're going through the education process. This obsession with metrics has an endpoint. It's not just data for data's sake, isn't that right?
I think the endpoint is to produce students who basically can't think. I mean, students who are incapable of being creative, students who are incapable of questioning authority, and students who basically have no considerations or concerns with any form of pedagogy that would take into considerations the responsibility of what it means to be a citizen, or the responsibility one has to the other, or for that matter, to imagine a future in which questions of justice and democracy even matter. I mean, I think we have to understand something here. I mean, this obsession with metrics is an attempt to move away from understanding students as young people who have a voice, who have a sense of creativity, a sense of possibility, to so narrowing the definition of what we call learning, that these places now become dead zones. So the issue here is not just an obsession with metrics. The issue here is to implement a pedagogy of repression under the banner of some kind of reform for which metrics is the only measure.
My daughter's going to be a senior in high school this year, and she's thinking about college. She had to take the SAT. She took the PSAT. They do a tremendous amount of testing. We're in California, STAR testing, to see how the schools are performing. It seems like the standardized test has become, at least when I was in school, it was definitely a metric, but it wasn't the dominant metric. But now it seems like that type of testing has become the dominant metric in terms of we need to figure out, can they fill in the bubble correctly? Are they strategic in terms of narrowing down their choices from 4 to 1, true false, that sort of thing. So there's kind of this binary thinking that is going on. It's not necessarily about expanding one's scope in terms of critically thinking about a problem, but rather, can I strategically figure out what the right answer is here?
Well, I think it's worse. It's worse than that. I think that you have to judge that paradigm not just by what it does, but by what it doesn't do. And if you look at what it doesn't do, it's not just about filling in bubbles. It's about excluding all aspects of the curriculum that in any way could produce young people who are imaginative, creative, have a sense of curiosity, have a sense of social responsibility. So in a sense, it really is what I say in the piece. It reproduces a dead zone of the imagination. These are dead spaces. And the other side of this, and I'm sure you know this, is that there's a lot of research that's now coming out that claims that this emphasis on standardization and high-stakes testing also leads to higher rates of incarceration for young people. That's a correlation that's shocking. So what you find is all these young people who in fact have all kinds of needs that need to be addressed by schools, particularly kids who are poor, underserved, people who have disabilities, people who have learning problems. All these kids are now dropping out of schools. The schools are being filled with two things. They're being filled with teachers who are de-skilled, or the conditions are being created for them to be de-skilled. They become technicians. And the other side, you have schools being filled with policemen or police people. And once you do that, you have the perfect fit. And what that means is that you have kids who are laboring under a pedagogy of oppression, and at the same time laboring under a school that becomes that's modeled now after the prison.
When I was a teacher, this was years ago, but I used to start. One of the classes I taught was in politics, political theory, and I used to start the class with a reading of Plato's Republic. And in Plato's Republic, where his ideal state tends to put the philosopher king at the top. Those who are born with souls of gold tend to go right to the top. This obsession with metrics, this constant tracking students into what they see as their ultimate destiny, whether it's you don't test well, you're not obedient, well, we're going to track you into a prison system. This has elements of a plutocracy, and you talk about a little bit about that it's not really actually a plutocracy, but it's actually there to serve the corporate state.
Absolutely. Look, one of the things that has to be recognized that emerges out of neoliberalism per se is that political sovereignty gives way to corporate sovereignty, meaning that corporations now basically control the political process. They control large parts of the media. They control many of the commanding institutions that define what the United States has become. That's not a democracy. And I think that one could argue very, very persuasively, and many people do, Sheldon Wolin being one of the best, that what we live in now is basically an authoritarian society. This is no longer a democracy. How can you call a society in which the President of the United States claims he has the right to assassinate people at will arbitrarily? How can you call a country a democracy when elections are completely controlled by money? They have nothing to do with democratic participation. How can you call a country a democracy when, in fact, we have former presidents who claim that the United States has the right to torture? How can you call this country a democracy when, in fact, the inequality gap in wealth and income is so severe that 1% control almost all the basic institutions that matter in the country? That's not a democracy. And I think that anybody who believes that, unfortunately, has really fallen into a kind of myth that just makes them complicit with actually the dark times in which the United States is going to have to face ahead.
We're in a period where there is a lot of economic anxiousness among people who are trying to either achieve or maintain a middle-class way of life. College is often seen as a way to better yourself, not only intellectually, make yourself more marketable in terms of a skill set, and command a better salary, or at least that's generally how it's been sketched for decades, if not longer. But going to college now, there is an enormous debt that gets accumulated for families and individuals as they go through the process, because college is not cheap. It's very expensive now. Even state schools have enormous fees attached to getting an education. And so there's a lot of pressure on students that once they finish their education to find a job that will pay off that debt, that they're looking at it in terms of investments and payoffs. So if that payoff is there, great, wonderful. You landed a job at Google or Facebook and suddenly you're making okay money. But if you're like many people, you're struggling. You're struggling to find that first job, even a second job, that's going to be able to give you the wherewithal to live and also pay off that debt that's going to be looming once you graduate. Corporations in themselves, as we were discussing, are inherently neoliberal cultures. They don't reward critical, independent thought. Rather, they reward often obedience to authority, unless you're the boss, of course, or in a leadership position. So it seems like graduates are in a bit of a bind, critical thought on the one hand versus obedience on the other. What's going to pay off in terms of a livelihood? You're a professor. I'm sure you hear a lot of your students voicing a little bit of anxiety about going out into the workplace. And do I have the right skills to be able to land a job? What are they saying to you?
Many of them are beginning to understand that they're caught up in not only a myth about education, but caught up in what I call the swindle of fulfillment. And that is that increasingly in a neoliberal society, what you have are resources being taken away from higher education. State funding is way down. For-profit colleges are now increasingly, for-profit interests are now increasingly monopolizing much of what stands in for higher education. And so as a result, where does the money come from? It comes from tuition. Tuition is raised. So there are people who have an enormous financial stake in making profits out of making young people suffer. And I think the issue here is to get to the root of the problem. I mean, the issue is not, will I get a job? I mean, that's a crucial issue. But the issue here is, does it no longer seem feasible for me to even think about getting a job in light of the fact that I'm now going to have a college degree? And I think that what you have to understand here is not only are schools being corporatized and students being punished, but this is the debt servitude that you talk about is really an attack on the imagination of students. Because they get out of school, they have these huge debts. They have to find a job where they can make lots of money, so they usually don't go into public service. I mean, you yourself just said they'll go to Google or they'll go to some corporate where they'll just reproduce the same ideology that actually caused the problem in the first place. And I think that what we need to see is we need to see young people saying at least three things. One, we need to make this contradiction and this problem visible so we know what the root causes are. Secondly, we need direct action so that we can stop this from happening. And thirdly, we have to just eliminate the debt. It's got to be eliminated. And I guess there's a fourth issue. And the fourth issue is, and I'm sorry if this sounds too utopian, but in the richest country in the world, education should be free. It's free in parts of Germany. It's free in other parts of the world because education is a social investment. It's not a personal privilege. It doesn't benefit certain people. It benefits everyone. In a society where you have more educated people, you have better health care. You have all the indexes for a better life rise for everyone. So we're really talking about something foundational to democracy, not something that is just about getting a better job and hopefully paying off your debt. And I think this is the issue that's going to be addressed.
Absolutely. When I was in high school and thinking about college, and I grew up in California, where they had the master plan of education, which the state schools were funded at various levels, and you could, depending on how you did on your SATs and coming out of high school with your grades, you could go to a UC like Berkeley, or you could go to a California State University. I went to SF State, but I did start at a community college. I started at my local community college, which had no tuition, had no student fees attached to it. All I had to pay for were books. That was it. And it was for the first semester. And then the next semester, they started instituting fees. And I remember the instructors and professors at my community college were just saying, this is not going to end. At first, they were saying, it's only going to be $50 a semester. $50 isn't that much to ask. They said, that's what they start with. And then they're going to go more and more and more to the point where even a community college education is going to be somewhat unattainable for many people out there. And that's exactly what happened. You flash forward, 30 years later or 25 years later, and even a community college education in California is a struggle for some people.
I think that what a lot of people, Ted, don't get is the right wing is still fighting the culture wars. They're terrified of what happened in the 60s. absolutely terrifying. I mean, that was their worst nightmare. You have students sort of asking for free education, demonstrating, claiming that learning should be linked to social change, that justice matters, Mario Savio, the free speech movement, it goes on. And I think that what they decided to do at some point was to make sure that the middle class doesn't get educated, to make sure especially that working class kids don't get educated. So what we now see is a pedagogy of oppression put in place all around high stakes testing and all of that stuff, the privatization and corporatization of public and higher education, which is really about a policy of exclusion. It's really about keeping people out, not just keeping them dumb, keeping them out. And those that do get in, they won't get educated, they'll get trained. This is not a discourse about education, it's a discourse about training. And we need to be clear about that.
And you were very clear in your article, which is very passionately written, very well written, and it explains the forces that are aligned against critical pedagogy, critical thinking, imagination, and all the things that make a person more than just a cog in the machine, if you will, or just another worker in the factory or the worker in the cube. And I encourage everyone in Truthout out there who is watching this video or who subscribes to Truthout or just reads it to read the article and subscribe to this video series as well. Henry, I want to thank you so much for being on the program and highlighting this very, very well-written article and very just a fascinating piece and something that I think people should not only just read but also take action on.
Ted, thank you for inviting me.
Henry Giroux is the Global TV Network Chair at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, which is located in the English and Cultural Studies Department. He's the author of many books, many of which address this very issue about critical pedagogy. And he's also a member of Truthout's Board of Directors. Thanks for watching Truthout Interviews. I'm Ted Asregadoo. We'll see you next time.